Good morning. This is Jason D coming live at you from Film Fanatic headquarters. So I hope everyone's doing good. It is Thursday. It's hard to believe it's Thursday already. Right in the middle, well, second week or so of November here. And so I've been watching lots of movies. I finished up the last of my coverage or my latest batch of videos on the Friday the 13th series, my favorite franchise of all time. Love that shit to death. And I finished up with covering a documentary about the franchise, about the Friday the 13th franchise called The Man Behind the Mask, and it's about the various actors who through the years who have played the iconic Jason Voorhees. So very cool documentary. Well, I should say the interview segments in the documentary are really, really great. There's like a special features component on the documentary that's part of the documentary that's really good. The um, the documentary itself is kind of trash. It's kind of shit, and it's because it's in trash in not a good way. Like I constantly watch a lot of shit and trash, and I love that. I love it. Good trash is great. So I think when I say that, I think of like brings to mind John Waters. Like John Waters made trash cool. I mean it's just great. So it's that kind of thing, and so it's trashy in a bad way. So since then, it's been I don't know, it's been a couple weeks since I finished up. It's been a couple weeks since I've done that. So I just been watching a few other movies. I've been mixing things up. I went to the video shop a few weeks ago, or not the video shop, I should say. I went to the Goodwill in Rockland, which I think is outside of Goodwill, outside of Bull Moose, is probably uh, really awesome. I've gotten some really good movies there, and then I've gone up to the Belfast one also, and I got a bunch of movies there also. So, and I try not to buy DVDs, but I end up doing it. I end up doing it anyway. So, one of the movies uh, I've seen it actually. It's funny. It's a movie that I think. Well, I don't want to get into it quite yet, but it's a movie that I have lots of mixed things about. But there's something about it that it has caused me to watch it. I've seen it quite a few times, even though I have pretty mixed things about it. And it's uh, it's a funny thing when it happens. Like a movie that you're curious about, or there's something that you watch that ain't, you might even consider it to be a train wreck, but yet you're inclined to like kind of watch it again. Prometheus was one of those movies. Like that movie, is kind of a train wreck, but there was something about it where I was drawn to like watch it, and I would watch it and almost thinking I would like it, or almost like because I was really anticipating when that movie was coming out. I was like excited, really excited for that movie, and went into it thinking I'm psyched up. I'm gonna like this, but that wasn't the case. And but there was something about it that I kept seeing it, that I've watched it, quite a few times. I finally reached a point of where now I am so done and I can't watch that movie anymore, and I've just totally have completely dismissed that movie at this point. So anyway, so today's show is on a movie that is called Copland. Stars Robert De Niro, Ray Liotta, Harvey Keitel, Sylvester Stallone. And this is definitely a movie that, I mean, if you talk about kind of a so-called like dream cast, like this is a movie that, for all intents and purposes, you'd think this movie would be awesome. Like this would totally work, and that this is going to be fire. And again, I bought this movie. I saw Copland quite a few years ago. It's been out. I mean, it's hard to believe. It came out in 1997, which is nuts. I didn't realize that it came out in 97. It was also the debut for James Marigold, or James Mangold, who is a pretty, prolific director. He's made some really good movies, and I believe that this was his first movie. He directed Logan, which is that movie's I think a fucking masterpiece. Like that movie is just amazing. That came out in 2017. He also directed the latest installment of the Indiana Jones franchise, which I heard was terrible. Um, 310 to Yuma, which I think is a pretty good western. The Girl Interrupted It with Angelique Jolie. It's a pretty good movie. And the other movie, which I believe got him some Academy Awards, Joaquin Phoenix, Walk the Line. That was commercially like his most successful movie, the Johnny Cash story. Um, so he's like, really, become a pretty big, popular, a serious force as a director. And Copland, I believe, was his debut. Um, and again, this cast, when you look at it, it's like it's insane. I mean, it's as stacked as you can get. I mean, Michael Rappaport, Annabelle Sakura, Alexandra Addy, Kathy Moriarty, Ray Liotta, Harvey Keitel, like I said, um, Robert Patrick, Sylvester Stallone. Just, an incredible cast. And this movie is like, I don't know, I think this movie is so, again, it's got a watchable quality, but I just think that this movie it just feels like there's so many things about this movie that on paper it should be really great. It should be awesome. And I just picked up this Blu-ray version of it. It was really cheap, $4. And last year, in some of my travelings, I picked up Copland on. Again, it had been quite a few years since I'd seen it. And again, I'm blown away when I look it up, and I'm like, wow, like this came out in '87. Like that's crazy. Because I remember when this movie came out, and it was like it was looked at or regarded as like this kind of low, indie film, and what have you, a low budget kind of independent movie, and it's during the that time period, where there was kind of this, renaissance of independent films coming out. It was like a little bit after around the time that Reservoir Dogs had come out, so there was like all of these like low budget kind of indie films coming out because Reservoir Dogs really was like huge when it came out, and it was like it kind of ushered in this new era of like independent filmmaking. So it was like really kind of interesting, and I think that this came out around that time, and it was the debut of James Mangold's career and his first film. Um, and I bought Copland, so I remember seeing it a few years after it came out, and I thought it was good, decent, but it was so long ago. And then I was at it was actually last year. I bought it. I came across Copland on DVD, and it was at Goodwill, so I bought it, and I watched it, and I was like, I felt like, again, it's one of those things. A good concept, amazing cast, kind of a cool story, kind of an original idea. But then I thought, um, man, I was so underwhelmed by this movie, and I was in some ways I felt like this movie was such a kind of a misfire. I feel like there is so much. I love a gritty film where say like a gritty murder mystery or a gritty cop drama film. But I think like you could think of a movie like say an older film also, Internal Affairs with Andy Garcia, which is like a cop movie about these corrupt cops, for instance. And there's like even a film like Training Day. It's pretty gritty. It's kind of mean and low down and dirty, but there's an area of like they are very suspenseful. Those both those films are very suspenseful, and they are there's a there's a feeling that you're really getting drawn into the characters. There's good characterizations, and I feel like the weird thing about, and so before I get into this actual movie itself or this disc, so I own Copland on DVD, and then I last week when I went out to do some travel and shopping, I came across it on Blu-ray, and so I was like, oh, all right, cool. I'm not really a huge fan of this movie, but I was like, well, it's $4. It'd be cool to just see what it looks like on Blu-ray, and maybe it will, maybe I'll think of it differently. And this was probably the fifth time I've seen this movie, so I got it and I watched it the other night, and I do have to say that the transfer of this on Blu-ray is like amazing. Like it yeah, it looked and sounded amazing. This is a really great version of this film on Blu-ray. But again, I felt the same way. It felt like all of these like the tropes. It's got this level of this film. I feel like the writing for this film is way too heavy-handed. It feels like everything is so rushed, and there's no tension. Um, and it feels like it's really predictable after a while. It's so predictable, and then it has like these like you know these tropes, these like stereotypes um, of how of how we've seen these things done in films that are maybe way more successful. But it just has this like contrived narrative to it, and it just feels like things are forced. There's no time. I feel like there's no time of where. Best way I can describe it is like there's an opening sequence in this movie where you're kind of introduced to some of the characters, but then like right away something happens which is supposed to like draw you into the movie and kind of the heart of the story of what Copland is about. And it happens within 5 or 10, well, happens, it seems like 5 minutes into the movie. And it's kind of the heart of what this whole story is about. And it happens quick, and it's good, but it just feels um, like it was like off to the races and let's just do it. And it's pretty heavy-handed. It's a little bit, and again, this movie is supposed to be a very grounded film. It's supposed to be set. It's a cop drama. It's kind of a dark film, but it's about these corrupt cops that live in this community that is comprised of all of these other police and law enforcement families and police officers and what have you. And they all work in this city, but there's this little town outside in New Jersey, outside of the city, where all of these police kind of live, and it's about this town on how you know on how they operate, and they are you find out that basically all of these cops are basically incredibly corrupt and just just awful, disgusting people. And so it's about that. And so like the first thing happens, you're kind of introduced to the story, and it's like bam, so the movie's supposed to be very, very grounded and realistic, and they set out to make this movie kind of gritty and dirty and low budget, but um it just feels so forced. It feels like there's like zero tension in this movie. You know, again, those two movies I mentioned that are initially like cop dramas, Internal Affairs, Andy Garcia, and even Training Day with Denzel Washington. There's a ton of movies like that, but those are two I can think of off the top of my head. There's a lot of tension. There's some good character development. It's not so predictable. Like you're not being led by the hand, and you're not like you can't see what's going to happen a mile away. but there's character development. There's a little bit. There's a build. There's a slow burn to like understanding what's really going on. It's not like, here you go. Here's your cheeseburger. Now you got to eat it. That, and I feel like that's the main thing with Copland is like there's no, and again, it's supposed to be this real gritty, you know, film based, in reality and these such things, but there's no there are circumstances and things that happen in this film that I just feel are just so like utterly ridiculous. Like and it's supposed to be a film that is in set in a reality, in a gritty, current time, or in a contemporary, period. But it just feels like there are things that happen in the situations with some of the characters that are just like, no way, no way would something like that happen, in reality. Like, there's no way like that kind of a confrontation would happen between two characters, and it's there is a situation that happens between one of the cops and one of the uh, ER guys who is who comes to the scene of this shooting, and there are these confrontations that happen between the two between these medics and these police officers, and it's like just unbelievable. Like, it just doesn't make any sense that would happen right away, and there would be no like build up to that, and it's just kind of ridiculous and it's overly dramatic. I don't know, like and it doesn't. So when those situations happen in this film, which it happens all the time, it just feels like it takes you out of this place of like thinking, well, this is kind of a you know set in reality, a real gritty kind of low budget film, but like which it is, but then and if you're playing that card, well then the characters need to like be kind of also grounded in reality, and then what they're going to be saying to each other needs to be kind of grounded in reality. And I feel like with the writing at times, there's it happens a lot. Again, like I said, it's so far fetched and so overly dramatic that it would never happen in reality, and it just like takes you out of the movie. And the other thing too is like you have this stacked cast, you have a star-studded cast, and after a while, like you don't, it's all kind of a blur. Like there is no real character development about any of these actors, with any of these characters. I think if anything, with Sylvester Stallone's character, there is that, and I think that's a little bit of say a saving grace for this film. He plays a cop who just doesn't really have his life together and is kind of down and out, and he is kind of this guy who kind of gets picked on a lot, and he gets pushed around by a lot of people. And Sylvester Stallone, I mean, when he did this film, it was a big change. We'd never seen Sylvester Stallone play somebody who's kind of this, vulnerable, almost pathetic character who gets, picked on and pushed around by his colleagues, and nobody takes him seriously. And suddenly he's thrust into the situation of where he's got to change. Um, so it was a departure, and I think his character, they there is some pretty good character development in his character, and it is interesting seeing Sylvester Stallone play this, you know, someone who we've never really seen before, and his role is actually pretty good, and I think that, and again, he is one of the main characters. He's probably the main character in the whole film, so I think that might be why there is this thing about this film of why I'm still kind of drawn to it, and why I think there's something about it that I like, but it's I think that, and I think this movie is actually because because of those other things that are happening in the film, like lack of development, character development, with all of these other characters that you have on screen, there's like zero, there's not really any tension. You kind of know right away that this person is kind of a scumbag. There's no build up. There's no like, when you think of a film, another great example of a film of like where it's a real character study, and then you start to really realize how dangerous these people are. You take a movie like say Goodfellas. Like, I mean, that's it's a masterpiece, but it like you're it's character development. It's a development for a reason to understand, to have empathy towards the character, to be drawn into it, and allowing there to be patience to understand those things. And I feel like this movie could have had that tension and could have had that development, but it just doesn't. It's kind of cold. It's kind of feels empty. There's like this. There's not really any meat on the bone. So, and again, it gets very predictable. And so it's I I the other thing too that happened to me the other night when I watched this film was I felt like it's actually wicked boring and wicked slow. It's really hard, super hard to get through. This movie is incredibly slow. I love slow films, but again, there has to be something worthwhile to keep your attention. There's got to be um, a thread that ties it all together for the viewer or for yourself, and it's hard. It's really hard, and it's very hard to get through this film. And the other thing the thing that I find that I don't like about this film that I think is just really awful is Robert De Niro's character. I mean, his character in this film is just like the most cliched bullshit thing, and it's literally De Niro like playing himself, showing up, getting paid, and just doing his whole like you looking at me thing, or you talking to me, like literally it's just that, and he's just him playing himself, and and I love De Niro, his especially his classic periods. I think even the last film he did, Killers of the Flower Moon, he is really great in that film because he's kind of like back to being an actor again. But he went for a whole period in the '90s and for like 15 years, maybe more, where he basically just kind of dialed it in as playing himself. And this is like an example of him doing it. Probably this is the biggest example of De Niro kind of just playing himself. Like he does the whole thing, and it's like, really? And it could have been so cool. It could have been really interesting. Like his role in The Joker, for instance, was incredible. Like even in The Irishman, he really played somebody different. God forbid. But yeah, I don't know. I'd say if you haven't seen this movie, maybe see it. But I don't know. It's really hard to get through. I'm glad I bought it on Blu-ray. As weird as that sounds, you know, that was definitely an improvement quality wise. But man, the movie itself is like this movie gets a lot of acclaim too. I've heard about a lot of people saying it how great this film is, and James Mangold like being this really incredible director. But I really think he's kind of overrated. Um, I think Logan's the best film he's done by far. It's pretty hit or miss, and I think this movie was his first, and this gets some praise because of that. It's not. It's not really great. It looks like this movie is going to be awesome, but it's like that thing of when you hear like the idea of like the super group, like you get all these amazing musicians together, it's automatically going to be the best thing ever. And that's not true because if a group, a band's going to have chemistry or not. And it's not based on, being a celebrity. That, if you're a celebrity first, that's going to create that chemistry. No, you got to have, the work is, all those things got to be fleshed out. There's got to be chemistry. There's got to be, in this case, a real fleshed out and story that can do it even without those actors. So, yeah, it's the other thing. The main thing about this movie is I generally think it's wicked boring and it's really slow. It really drags ass. So in that regard, it's kind of a hard movie to get through. So I'd say there's a billion other movies you could watch that are way more enjoyable and exciting. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.